For a very long time, the wolf seemed like one of the safest facts in natural history. A wolf was a wolf. An ancient predator, recognizably itself from the Ice Age to the present, ranging across Europe, Asia, and North America as if it had simply endured while so many other creatures disappeared. The familiar picture felt stable. Wolves survived the Pleistocene, spread across the north, and eventually gave rise to dogs. Simple. Coherent. Almost too coherent. But two questions quietly began to undermine that certainty. If wolves are among the oldest surviving symbols of the wild, why does their deeper genetic history look so strangely discontinuous? And when we say dogs came from wolves, which wolves do we actually mean? Those questions matter because ancient DNA has done something rare in science. It has not just added detail to an accepted story. It has forced that story to bend. In some places, to break. The older view imagined continuity. Regional wolves in Europe were thought to be descended, more or less directly, from older wolves of Europe. North American wolves from older wolves of North America. A wide, durable species, altered by climate and prey, but fundamentally persistent across place and time. Ancient genomes now suggest something more unsettling. The wolves that lived across the Mammoth Steppe during the late Pleistocene were not merely earlier versions of the animals we know today. Many belong to lineages that are now gone. Some left only faint traces. Others seem to have vanished altogether. And the ancestry of living wolves appears to be dominated not by an even, local continuity everywhere, but by major population reshuffling near the end of the last ice age. In other words, the modern wolf may be ancient as a species, but many modern wolf populations are not ancient in the way we once imagined. That distinction changes everything. To understand why, you have to leave behind the romantic image of the wolf as a timeless creature and step into a colder, more unstable world. During the last ice age, the northern hemisphere was not a static wilderness. It was a moving system of ice sheets, grasslands, prey migrations, collapsing habitats, and abrupt ecological pressure. Herds shifted. Landscapes opened and closed. Entire food webs reorganized. A predator living through that world did not simply remain itself in a fixed territory for tens of thousands of years. It had to move, adapt, merge, vanish, reappear. For a long time, researchers could only infer that story indirectly, from bones, skull shapes, tooth wear, isotopes, geography. Useful clues, but incomplete ones. A skeleton can tell you what an animal looked like. It cannot, by itself, tell you whether that animal belonged to a lineage that still exists. Ancient DNA changed that by allowing researchers to compare wolves separated not only by geography, but by tens of thousands of years. And the first major surprise was scale. When scientists assembled large datasets of ancient wolf DNA, from Europe, Siberia, Beringia, and North America, they found that the genetic map of the past was crowded with lineages far stranger than the present. Ice Age wolves were not a single undifferentiated backdrop to modern populations. They were dynamic, regionally varied, and in some cases deeply divergent from wolves alive now. Then came the more difficult realization: much of the ancestry shared by living wolves appears to have spread relatively late. One influential line of evidence, based on ancient mitochondrial genomes spanning roughly the last 50,000 years, suggested that contemporary wolf populations trace a large part of their ancestry to an expansion from Beringia around the end of the last glacial maximum, roughly 25,000 years ago. Beringia, the enormous Ice Age region linking northeastern Asia and northwestern North America, was not just a bridge. At times, it may have been a refuge, a source, a staging ground. That was the first conceptual answer. What does it mean to call the wolf ancient if many wolves alive today are, in genetic terms, the outcome of a later expansion? It means ancient and continuous are not the same thing. The species is old. The modern distribution of its ancestry is younger, more turbulent, and more contingent than people assumed. But even that was not the end of the story, because later whole genome studies added another layer of complexity. When researchers analyzed dozens of ancient wolf genomes across the last 100,000 years, the picture sharpened and became less simplistic. Modern wolves, especially in Eurasia, do seem to share a substantial portion of ancestry that became widespread within the last 25,000 years. Yet they also retain local deep ancestry, genetic echoes of older regional populations that were not erased completely. So the emerging truth is not that one neat wave replaced every wolf everywhere. It is stranger than that. There was continuity in some places, replacement in others, mixture in many. Some older lineages disappeared. Some survived only in fragments. Some modern wolves carry the memory of local Ice Age populations, but not in the uninterrupted, straightforward way earlier narratives preferred. This matters because our minds like clean categories. Replacement or continuity. Old or new. survival or extinction. The wolf appears to refuse that simplicity. It survived the Ice Age not as a frozen relic, but as a moving mosaic. That is a very different animal from the one people thought they knew. And nowhere is that difference more consequential than in North America. For years, the deep history of wolves in North America seemed easy to imagine, ancient wolves on the continent eventually becoming the wolves of the continent. But genetic evidence complicates that. Present-day North American wolves appear to derive much of their ancestry from populations related to ancient Siberian wolves that spread after the height of the Ice Age, along with later admixture in some populations from coyotes. That means some earlier North American wolf lineages may not have left clear direct descendants in the wolves alive today. The wolf that once hunted Pleistocene horses and bison south of the ice sheets may not map cleanly onto the modern animals carrying the same name. The shape remains. The lineage changes. The body can deceive. That is one of the most profound lessons ancient DNA keeps teaching. Species are not always what their silhouette suggests. A familiar form can carry an unfamiliar past. What looks continuous in the fossil record can conceal turnover, fusion, and replacement at the genetic level. And once you accept that, the second question becomes unavoidable. When we say dogs came from wolves, which wolves are we talking about? Not, it now seems, the living wolf populations we once used as convenient stand-ins. For decades, the origin of dogs was tangled in an argument over place. Europe or Asia? West or East? Single domestication or multiple? But the deeper problem may have been conceptual. The debate often assumed that present-day wolves were close enough to the founding populations to act as reliable proxies. Ancient DNA suggests otherwise. Large studies of ancient wolf genomes indicate that early dogs were overall more closely related to ancient wolves from eastern Eurasia than to ancient wolves from western Eurasia. Yet that is not the whole story. Dogs in the Near East and Africa appear to carry substantial ancestry from a different wolf-related source tied to western Eurasia. So even the dog's origin seems to preserve a memory of a wolf world that no longer exists in pure form. In effect, the wolves that mattered most to the beginning of the dog may have belonged to populations that are extinct, transformed, or only partially represented in living wolves. That does not merely revise dog history. It changes the meaning of wolf history. Because the old mental picture placed the wolf behind us, as a visible ancestor, look at a modern wolf, and you are looking, more or less, at the animal humans first domesticated. The newer picture is more elusive. Look at a modern wolf, and you are looking at a survivor of repeated climatic upheaval, population movement, admixture, and lineage loss. The wolf in front of you is real, ancient, and magnificent, but it is not a transparent window into all earlier wolves. It is the latest expression of a history full of disappearances. That is why the story feels almost paradoxical. The wolf is one of the great survivors of the Ice Age. And yet the genetic world that produced modern wolves is partly built from vanished wolves. It endured, but not by remaining unchanged. It persisted, but not as a single, uninterrupted inheritance everywhere. It crossed the catastrophe that ended so many Pleistocene giants, but it crossed by shifting shape in population terms, expanding here, mixing there, retaining fragments of older ancestry while losing others. A species can survive while many of its stories die. This is also why the wolf matters beyond zoology. When the ancestry of wolves is redrawn, the map of the late Pleistocene changes with it. Wolves were apex predators. Their movement reflects prey movement, climate stress, ecological openings, and the restructuring of whole northern ecosystems. To trace wolf ancestry is to trace the pulse of the mammoth steppe, the retreat of glaciers, the opening of migration corridors, the changing margins where humans and large carnivores encountered one another. The wolf becomes a witness species. Not because it saw history, but because history remained inside it. In the marrow of old bones, in damaged fragments of mitochondrial DNA, in genomes rescued from permafrost and cave sediments, there survives a record of worlds that no longer exist. Not abstract worlds. Real ones. Valleys where extinct horses ran. Plains where giant herbivores fed beneath a colder sky. Crossroads where people, wolves, and the first dogs may have shared the same horizons without yet sharing the same future. And this is perhaps the most humbling part. Ancient DNA did not reveal a neat origin story that closes the case. It revealed how inadequate our old need for neatness was. Researchers still debate key details. The exact demographic history of regional wolf populations remains under active study. Some results rely on mitochondrial data, others on whole genomes, and each has limits. Some ancient populations remain unsampled. There are places on the map where the evidence is still thin, and there may always be lost lineages we can only infer indirectly. But uncertainty here is not weakness. It is precision. Science did not fail because the wolf story turned out to be messier than expected. Science succeeded because it forced us to see the mess. And that returns us to the second question. Which wolves stood at the beginning of the dog? The most honest answer, at least for now, is this: not simply the wolves we know, and not likely a single familiar population preserved intact into the present. The ancestral wolves behind early dogs seem to belong to an Ice Age genetic landscape richer, broader, and more fragmented than the modern world. Some of those wolves left descendants. Some left contributions. Some left only shadows. So the origin of wolves was never what we thought, because we were asking the wrong thing from the wrong image. We thought the wolf was a fixed inheritance from deep time, standing unchanged at the edge of human memory. What ancient DNA reveals instead is a lineage that survived through movement, replacement, persistence, and mixture, a creature ancient not because it stayed still, but because it kept passing through fire without becoming only one thing. The wolf, then, is not simply the past made visible. It is the remainder of several pasts, fused into one living animal. And maybe that is why it still unsettles us. Not just because it is wild, but because it carries an older lesson. Survival is not always purity. Origins are not always singular. Continuity can be real without being simple. The wolf we imagine was timeless. The wolf the evidence gives us is more difficult than that, and more extraordinary. If you want to keep following stories where science changes the shape of history, stay with us. Because somewhere in the snowline behind every familiar animal, there may still be another world waiting to be recovered.